second here. We're at the ILEETA 2022 conference. With me, my friend, Lynn Westover. Thanks for joining me, brother.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.
You're here teaching this week.
Yeah.
You and the team with SLC Squared, you guys are putting information out there into the world.
Oh, yeah.
What is it that you guys are teaching a course on?
Well, our main programs, the overarching is 6-layer concept, which is human terrain mapping, behavior pattern recognition. So real quick kind of background on what that is and who we are and how that got started. Our cadre, our crew, and me and my partner, Jay, we were part of some of the original programs under some of the military programs, such as Training and Education Command for the Marine Corps, JIADO, Joint Improvised Explosive IED Defeat Organization, all the acronyms you can think of, but it was specifically designed around human intelligence and how the intuitive thought process works for soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines on the ground, both with like combat hunter programs, ASAT, SOFSAT, ITSAT, and essentially how to have rapid decision-making in critical dynamic environments, such as asymmetrical environment or regular warfare environment, and understand that there are second and third order effects of those decisions, not just immediate as far as life and limb, but also about, hey, the rapport that I have within that community or that local area, and how do we co-opt people to get on board with us instead of fighting against them. So it's pretty multifaceted, but the simplest way of putting it is, you know, you and I go to a Starbucks somewhere and we're hanging out, and I can say, okay, in 10 seconds, if we're gonna have a problem child within this Starbucks, who's it gonna be? And you go, well, that guy. Okay, cool, but here's the magic. Why? How do you know? And so, like, things like behavior pattern recognition and understanding like body language, kinesics, we've been doing this since before there was even written and spoken word. So that's what we do, is we apply a lexicon, a nomenclature, a vocabulary to that intuitive thought process. It's not a sixth sense. It's actually your brain subcognitively is doing these things without you even having to think about it. And so when you're able to overlay my articulation, it's like, yeah, well, look, did you see the proxemic push that he just did there? Kinesically, he's mission-focused, predatory looks at me. He's certainly definitely affiliated with this area of the thing. And atmospherically, culture's context, within this habitual area geographically, his behavior does not match with what the context relevance is of what's going on. That's a much deeper articulation. And we found that with law enforcement, some of those lessons learned from those programs that we are a part of was what law enforcement was really wanting is, hey, after the fact, we're looking for the articulation. So the decision-making model we use enables us to, right here, right now, make the decision based on the baseline that I've established and the anomalies that I've identified against those 6 layers of human behavior. And then after the fact, well, I don't have to rethink my articulation because I already considered it within my most probable, most dangerous course of action. So that's what we did. We took those programs that were developed for the military, but with law enforcement subject matter experts. And then it was tested and proven in combat, and now we've taken it back and specifically addressed issues for the 21st century law enforcement officer, and even things that substantiate, you know, whether you call them anomalies or red flags, or as the FBI Behavioral Sciences Division did with, as far as they call it concerning behaviors. They released a white paper in June of 2018 where they talked about that specifically, right? And one of the things that they came out with is, on average, there are 4.6 concerning behaviors that were prevalent in all those active shooter, active killer incidents from 2000 to 2013. Well, our decision-making algorithm starts at 3. Once you reach 3 anomalies, you must act, you must make a decision. Now, my decision could be some form of threat reduction, use of force, most certainly. That's the hardest thing for me to tip over, but it could be as simple as a form of contact or a capture, not necessarily detaining or arresting somebody, even just capturing them with a cell phone photo or something like that, so I can look at it later and process, like, hey, what exactly happened here, right? So that's what we did and put that together. And the interesting thing, too, that came out of it, in all those situations where it was 2 or less concerning behaviors, they also identified that just one of those concerning behaviors was enough by itself to warrant at least law enforcement officer contact. So think about that. Like, if I do this to you right now, I'm pointing my hand at you heuristically like a gun. Yeah, it's not a real gun, but I can tell it doesn't make you feel comfortable. Your brain, you know exactly what my intent is. You understand exactly what I'm doing. I don't need 2 more anomalies to make that decision. So in any case where you have positive identification, of whatever, it's a threat or an individual, most certainly you just go right to making a decision. But what is a threat, right? Gun, knife, bomb, I get it. But as we see in the dynamic atmosphere that is our world, the human terrain, it can be much more subtle. We call it the pocket lamp, right? So it's looking for those slight cues because there's always pre-event indicator.
You know, the dynamic and rapidly evolving thing that is, you know, operational environments in an asymmetric warfare environment, those are things that we've, over the last 20, 25 years, we've had the chance to go through and work everything out, right, in the military perspective. And it's interesting because we're now able to take that and take the science behind that and all of the many, many millions of dollars that the government spends on that, bring it back home to law enforcement, and then take those things that are inherent or intuitive in officers, where there's a reason I want to sit in the back when I sit down at a restaurant, why I want my back to a corner. Right. It's instinctive.
Right.
And I'm scanning, I'm watching, but now what we're doing is we're saying, hey, listen, you're doing that for a reason, and here's why. And let's walk through the science behind that so you understand what you're doing. Right. You can do it more efficiently. And if something does pop off afterwards, you can contextualize and articulate your actions because of your understanding of your environment.
Well, there's a couple things to consider with that, right? So first and foremost is, you know, because you hear it a lot, like the over-militarization of law enforcement. Well, no, hold on a second here. We're talking about people, right? So first things first. When I was deployed to both Iraq and Afghanistan and many other places, the reality was, for me, is that the way I acted, the way I behaved, and the way I treated people determined, as I was walking in on that village, like say in the upper Sangin Valley, the most dangerous place in Afghanistan at the time when I was there, and I'm walking into Malazai, my behavior determined whether or not I was walking out of that village under my own power, or I was going home on a dust-off flight. I was going home in a ramp ceremony in a flag-draped coffin. And while, hey, I may not necessarily like this guy or agree with like what his thoughts or his beliefs are, but I have to recognize and understand, like, hey, this person, the way they view me is important, right? And they're not my enemy, right? And so how is that any different than a law enforcement officer doing productive footwork on the street? It's not. And it's not like the people in that I was dealing with were wearing a uniform. I'm looking for a needle and a stack of needles. And you add into the fact, we're talking about behavior, human beings. The same behaviors that I can see in somebody in, say, Alaska or Alabama, I can see in Afghanistan or Azerbaijan, right? And because people are people and they're the same. And while not all criminals will rise to the level of a terrorist is a criminal, and they exhibit the same criminal behaviors. And it was really interesting, the same thing going back to that, the behavioral sciences paper I was talking about. A lot of the indicators that we saw and the reasons behind why some of these active killer incidents were occurring were the exact same reasons why we were seeing insider threat incidents, specifically in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so there's that aspect of it too, of where I tell officers in the class, you know, in the same 10-year period where I was fighting in 2 war zones, right? There was something like, just in Afghanistan alone, like 1,800 service members killed in action. During that same 10-year period, there was something like 2,250 law enforcement officers who were killed in the line of duty. So you can argue with me, you know, what the differences are or the similarities, and that's fine. I'm open to have that debate. I think you should be comfortable. Like, if you really believe in what it is you're saying, you should be okay with somebody critiquing or questioning what you're saying. But what I don't think we can argue about is like that the threat and the danger is every bit as real for them. And so that's why we specifically wanted to look at that and readdress it. And with regard to that, one last point with regard to that is it was those law enforcement professionals, we called them LEPs, that were shoulder to shoulder with us, and they would say, hey, Sherpa, Lynn, check it out. You see that guy over there? Yeah. All right, you see how he's looking at that guy there? Yeah. Well, they know each other. And you see the way his body, his kinesics and his proxemics to this and that, that's his car, or that car is important to him. Maybe it's a vehicle-borne sniper platform or whatever it is, but yeah, he's holding. Because they learn that stuff on the street. You know, it's a lot through OJT, and what we're trying to do is help with that learning curve so that I walk into a situation with some file folders and some memory and motion links, so you don't have to go through the shots fired, you don't have to go through the fatal car accident or the knockdown, drag-out fight or the attack with the edged weapon. But if I can tell you what it smells like, what it tastes like, what it feels like, that's a much stronger file folder than having to do, you know, it builds that automaticity, that muscle memory faster than the 10,000 hours or 10,000 repetitions I need. And I call it walking and chewing gum at the same time. Or another way to look at it is like we're playing Clue. Hey, look, it was Colonel Mustard with the candelabra in the library. And not because I got some kind of opinion, and not because of some implicit or explicit bias, but because I can articulate that against science. So if you want to wide-ear it, then, well, talk to Masad Ayub, talk to Gavin DeBecker, Malcolm Gladwell, Reed Interview School, Force Sciences. There's subject matter experts out there that did the science to back it up. So now let's apply it.
Yeah. No, dude, I love that. And it's interesting because tomorrow you guys have the chance, you get to go sit down and teach an academy class where we're teaching recruits and officers. But here at ILEETA, we're teaching instructors.
Right.
So a little different, right? Another kind of that next level. What is those takeaways that you want these instructors walking out of your class with?
Man, I think like for us the biggest thing, like I'll sit in the classroom and like over both days, like we had a total of 75 attendees, which was awesome. And when I'm looking across the room, I said, I'm not the bearded Moses that's standing in front of you saying, hey, the way you've been doing it for the last 30 years is all wrong, and I'm going to show you the way. I tell them, like, the information and the relevance you walk into this room with, like, that room had 350 years of law enforcement experience on top of training experience in there. That's valuable experience. So how do we transmit that? How do we effectively and efficiently communicate that? And I think, that's what's so great about this conference. And the other thing that's great, like with Lon, like a lot of the conversations we were having with Lon, and one of the things that he said yesterday, and so I'm going to quote him on it, is when he got it from somebody else, I don't remember, but he's like, when the master thinks they've mastered it and they no longer are the student, they're no longer the master, right? So that is your mastery level of things when you are continually trying to learn and educate yourself. And there was even another class here where one of the gentlemen was talking about, like, hey, how tradition is kind of messing with that recipe, right? And it makes me think about the fact of, I would tell my guys and gals that I would have with me in my teams all the time, like, don't ever do anything without having a reason for it. Most certainly we know, hey, if I've got to break from SOP for a reason, for like say an officer safety, officer wellness reason, I better have a good legal, moral, and ethical reason for that. That being said, don't blindly follow SOPs either, because blindly following the SOPs will get you killed just as quick, or cause that overaction, that overuse of force, we call it going primitive, just as fast, right? You're still required, responsible to know, hey, why am I doing this? What even started this to begin with? We're talking about a traffic stop here. We're talking about, whatever the case may be. Like, exercising some tactical patience in some of these situations, and it's hard. I think that's the one big takeaway that a lot of these instructors and trainers that I've talked to, our peers, our counterparts, is that I don't think there is enough emphasis on training. There's a lot of emphasis on what's the gadget, what's the item, and it's like, well, hey, hold on a second. First of all, I have to train on that. I got to be proficient at it. I have to understand its limitations and capabilities. But if it's got batteries, if it's got a service life, it's, I need to talk to tech support to use it. Like, okay, that's more difficult. And even, look at Vertra. Like, even Lon says, he's like, the thing what's great about it is we still look at the human being as the technological advantage. It's not the system. It's the understanding and the education and the science that went into it to increase the human performance of the individuals that use it. And I think that's great. And for me, it's definitely, you get a lot of good takeaways. I know you presented here. Unfortunately, I missed your class because I was teaching at the same time. But I think that's the other thing, is it challenges you as an instructor or trainer or coach to have to get up. It's easy to talk to folks who you're teaching them something because they're walking into it with zero information. But when you have to teach amongst a group of your peers, that's a challenge. And you better be on your A game, because if you're not, somebody's going to come asking some questions, and you got to be prepared to answer them. Or, hey, there's nothing wrong with eating a little crow and saying, you know what, I don't know. Because you right away, if I try to BS you and what it is that I'm talking about, you'll figure it out. Maybe not at first, but after a minute, you're like, that something about that's not ringing true with me, right? So it's just, for me, I just find it's, you know what, I don't know, but I do know a lot of people that got a lot of information. And like with our relationship with ILET, 2 years now we've been developing this, and like I was talking about yesterday when me and you were talking to that other gentleman, I forget his name, but I was like, yeah, we have an advocate with you. You're advocating for us for the training, and you're also a resource. So if I do come up on something that, like, you know what, that throws me for a loop, I know I'm going to give Adam a call and say, hey, who can you connect me with that would know X? And so I think that's most important, because as we were talking about, the industry can be a little tricky to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely, especially for a couple ex-military guys, right?
No, for sure. Like I've been in a class, and I've had most of the time students like, hey, you know what, thank you for your service. I really appreciate everything you did, and so on and so forth, and I'm here to get whatever I can get from you. And I'll have some officers that'll be like, hey, great, thank you for your service or whatever, but what are you going to tell me about copping? And they got a point. And I just say, well, I'm not going to tell you anything about copping. If I have to walk into this room and teach you how to use your firearm appropriately, how better to communicate on your radio or any of those things, we got other problems that we need to talk about. That's not what I'm here to tell you about. I'm here to tell you about human beings, and how do I apply that with all that other training and all those other tools that we have, because they have a lot of good training, they have a lot of other tools. How do I implement that within my decision making? Yeah. And hey, you can lead a horse to water, right? And some folks get it. Some folks have a harder time like relating the two. I feel like we do a pretty good job. Not all of our stuff's military, but sometimes some of the exemplars we use are, I think they're even better, because to a certain degree, it shows those officers, like, it doesn't matter where you go in the world, right? If you're looking at it the right way, at the right perspective, you're gonna be able to make an identification. And most certainly too, like, it's not about tactics that they can figure out, but just, hey, it's a human problem. It requires a human solution. And specifically within law enforcement is the only civilian industry there is, the only one where you can lie to people, you can coerce. Like, that's a misnomer. People think like, oh, if you come up talk to me, like, you have, no, I don't. I can lie to you to get you out of that car back there for safety reasons, whatever. Obviously not for adjudication purposes, like in court or a written statement, but I can coerce you. I can use force, up to deadly force, as a civilian, to get you to do what I want you to do or what I need you to do according to those policies and procedures, right? The only civilian industry that does that. So yeah, there is a good reason for that oversight. There is a good reason for that accountability for, hey, why were you here? Why did you do this to begin with, and so on and so forth. And I think that's the other thing as far as like what's important about like ILET Network and some of the other associations and things that we have. I don't think there is enough communication with the civilian side of everything to really understand what are the friction points for law enforcement, like what's really involved with it, because I believe they have a misperception of it, but it's because nobody's talking about it, right? And it's not an easy job. It's very hard, and we want our best to do it, but we don't set them up for success, right?
Yeah, man. Couldn't agree with you more. Well, let's leave it there, brother.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man.
Appreciate it.
We'll see you next year.
Yep.
All right. That's it. Nailed it.
What do you think?